Hi, welcome to RE/MAX of Boulder video podcast. I'm Dwayne Duggan, and today we have Matt Finberg with us. So Matt Finberg has been reviewing contracts at RE/MAX of Boulder for 7 years. So every contract that gets written here, Matt takes a look at it to see if we're doing okay legally. So over time, Matt, I think it's been several thousand contracts you've done. Like last year alone, I know it was over 2,000 contracts you reviewed in 1 year, and 7 years of that, that's 10 to 15,000 contracts. So you've seen a lot of creative clauses written, a lot of variety of things. Now comes TRID. And so thanks for being here, first of all.
Pleasure to be here. Glad to talk about this.
Out of all the thousands of contracts you've reviewed here at RE/MAX of Boulder, how's it gone relative to TRID?
Relative to TRID, I would have to say I'm a very happy attorney. I have not yet had a problem where the TRID process caused a transaction to either be delayed or terminated.
So Matt, when we first heard about TRID, and as an attorney, what were your fears, if you had any, as far as what kind of legal complications are going to be arising out of all these new TRID regulations?
What I was worried about was the uncontrollable, the last minute diversion of some sort that made it impossible for the borrower to have those 3 days. And when you count the 3 days, it's interesting to note that the 3 days are based on whether your office is open on that day. If it's not open, then it's not counted. If it's a federal holiday or state holiday, it varies from state to state. And so I saw things getting a little crazy around whether the 3-day requirement had been met, even if the borrower, and it's not something that's waivable, which is unfortunate. So the borrower can't say, it only took me an hour to get through this stuff, I'm good, I'm really good. You didn't get your 3 days, you can't close the loan. And so you're gonna lose your earnest money and you're not gonna get the house. That's what I was worried about. And thank God, for the most part, it hasn't happened.
Right, fantastic.
Fortunately, with regard to TRID, although there was a great reaction when it was first promulgated as a regulation, and attorneys, for the most part, tried to draft for every possible thing that could go wrong. Nothing went wrong. And as a result of that, when contracts started coming through with automatic, say, 7 business day extensions for appraisal, for loan approval, etc., these items that apply to the process of approving the financing, with the market that we've enjoyed here in Boulder for the past 2 years, sellers could just say, you know what, I'm not interested, thanks anyway. And so there was a very quick retreat from trying to protect the buyers from every possible thing that could go wrong with the TRID process.
Well, it's interesting with Trevor that we just had, and since TRID came into effect, I think Premier Lending had closed around 500 loans, and out of those 500, he had just said that they had no problems with that. So it's pretty interesting. We went through all the myths and facts, and all those fears that we had at first were really not realized. But I guess as a realtor, my biggest fear is that multiple closing in 1 day type thing, where the third closing in the middle fails, and then that makes closing number 4 and 5. Any thoughts or a theme of a clause that could keep that closing together if there's a 3-day delay because they have to redisclose a TRID, and then kind of what happens for closing 4 and 5?
Well, I've been using language in contracts that I draft, which happen occasionally when the buyer or the seller have already made their deal. They don't need a real estate broker to find the property. They need an attorney to prepare the contract. I always thought it important to add a provision that said, in the event that closing is delayed as a result of a problem with the buyer's new loan, which is code for the mortgage, then the buyer has the right to extend closing for up to 3 business days. And the problem you address could be added to that language, and it is really the only language I recommend with respect to TRID. The only time you're going to run into problems, at least under the cases we've seen over the past year, is when you don't meet that 3-day requirement to look at to be able to look at the disclosures, think about them, understand them before you get to closing. And there's nothing you can do about it automatically unless you've provided in advance that you'll extend the closing date. So in your situation, you could say that in the event the closing is delayed because of a TRID-related malfunction in, say, your contract, or to expand it to your situation, to a closing occurring in your pipeline that day, then buyer or seller, I'd say buyer, would have the right to extend the closing date for 1 to 3 business days. That way you're protected. Usually these problems, in my experience, and you've had a little experience in this industry yourself, are best handled as they arise. Buyer and seller react like, all of a sudden they get real, for the most part. You don't have what you need to get closing done today. Can we extend it a day? Yeah, we'll do an amend extend and we'll come back tomorrow. Usually that's the case. Often it's not the case because you've got a seller who's got a backup offer. It's
right.
It's a lot better, than the one that you're closing on. You're saying, no, if you can't close, I'm really sorry to hear that. You know what? Not only am I going to take the other offer, I'm going to keep your earnest money
right.
because you defaulted.
That'd be the argument for making sure some sort of extension was in there, because otherwise in this market it could get blown out of the water.
So I think it's important to consult with an attorney, because attorneys are charged with creating the original language that appears in contracts. Brokers, as you know, have a limited right to practice law to complete the pre-printed contract. But when you have to start getting creative and go outside of the lines to protect your clients, the parties should retain their own counsel and take the broker off the hook. It's actually exposing a broker to unnecessary liability, and let the attorneys for the parties come up with a solution that can contemplate the situation that you just mentioned. That we're there, we've got the money, all issues are resolved. And we just bumped into a technical delay that's going to keep us from buying and selling the property.
Well, it's interesting, Matt, that in talking with Trevor, that one of the ways that we keep some of these problems from happening is just moving up the walkthrough. Because if there are problems and the seller credit has to happen or something like that in order to solve a repair that happened, if you do it at 7 days, it gives more time. And then I think the lenders have gotten better at disclosing all their fees, so there's no last-minute surprises that they have to redisclose in the last 3 days. So not near as bad as we thought it was. And so both from you and Trevor, it's good to hear that things aren't not near as bad with TRID as we thought they were going to be.
They're not. There are problems out there we don't need to discuss on this podcast, but this fortunately isn't one of them.
Right.
A little bit of extra language on flexibility for the buyer to extend the closing date. Not every single condition or deadline is enough to protect a buyer and not scare off a seller in a market where he could turn around and sell it to somebody else with no contingencies.
Right.
Cash offer. Bye, thanks, sorry about your anxiety, but my guy doesn't have it.
Right. Matt, thank you for filling us in on the legal aspects
My
of TRID.
pleasure.
RE/MAX Boulder video podcast. Dwayne Duggan signing off.